Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Village of Lake Bluff Sustainability and Community Enhancement Ad Hoc Committee regular meeting for Tuesday, June 20th, 2023. First up on the agenda is the call to order and the roll call.
Member Busio,
Present.
Member Cole,
Present.
Member Hance,
Present.
Member Richer is absent today, Member Twitchell,
Present.
and Chair Rayner.
Here. Okay, next up, we have 15 minutes if there's anyone here who wishes to speak on an item that is not on tonight's agenda. Is there anyone here for a non-agenda item? Okay, let's go on to general business.
All right. So the first the first item of general business is a tree species list best practices presentation by Colette Kopic, and she is on Zoom to give that presentation. And she is with the Morton Arboretum.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to the Village Board and FBC for hosting me this evening. I'm just going to share my screen and we can get started. All right, can you see that okay?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. All right, so hello everybody again. My name is Colette Kopic. I'm the COTI Community Coordinator for the Chicago Region Trees Initiative. The Chicago Region Trees Initiative is an initiative formed by the Morton Arboretum and 16 other partners. And our goal is to create a tree canopy that is more diverse, more abundant, and more equitably distributed to provide needed benefits to all people and communities. And the reason why I'm speaking with you today is because Lake Bluff was recently awarded a wonderful grant award for a project, and we're going to do a species list update. So I'm here to share best practices on choosing what species to plant in your community. So just to take it back as to why we're even here, why I even care about trees. Trees can fulfill so many of our goals we have in community development. They can improve community cohesion, reduce energy costs by the shade they provide on buildings, increase property values. Studies show they can make communities safer the more trees that you have in your community. They can provide habitat for wildlife and beautify your neighborhoods. There's even studies out there that show the more trees are around certain small businesses, the more consumers are attracted to that area. And then there's a lot of physical benefits as well, improving air quality, improving mental health and physical health, and they can even store carbon and cool our neighborhoods. And you know, there's a lot of issues out there, especially with climate change, with rising temperatures. And so here's a map of Lake Bluff that shows tree canopy on the right and surface temperature. So just keep in mind, you know, as we're experiencing these hotter times, surface temperature was calculated by our LIDAR analysis. And, you know, trees can really help tend to lower our heat island effect we have. So they're a great piece of infrastructure to help with rising temperatures. And just to quantify a little bit on how much your trees are really doing for you, this is only from tree data from your inventory in your parks, so not your public village trees. This is from an inventory done in 2016, estimated that cumulatively the benefits that your trees are providing in air quality are about $167,000 worth. Carbon sequestered is $145,000 worth, and stormwater management over about $150,000 worth. So I just like having these numbers out there to just show what our trees are really doing for us. These were calculated using the iTree tool, and again, just from your parks, because we haven't done a full inventory of your village trees yet. Now, so we know that trees are important and we want to plant them everywhere and take care of them, but we put them through a lot, especially in a developed and urban environment. So it's important to choose the right trees that we're planting. So just to put some this into consideration about what trees are really going through when we plant them in our right-of-way, we're putting them in places with restricted root space, especially if there was development over the last even 20 years. There's poor soil composition and structure. there's soil compaction. There can be a lack of direct sunlight from buildings around. There's pollution from vehicles. You know, we want to salt our roads during winter to make sure that everybody's driving somewhere safe. That salt can really end up on the right of way and just create a really stressful environment for the tree. Heat from the pavement, there's increased risk from pests and diseases. And I'm not saying all this to, you know, say, no, we shouldn't have any trees because it's too hard. We need to remember how much we put our trees through so that we can select the correct species that would survive in stressful environments like this. So another thing, some of you may remember the Dutch elm disease around 1950s, where we lost approximately 30 million trees in the US. So this was the result of an invasive fungus that killed a lot of our street trees. Elms are excellent street trees. They can really deal with all those stressors. So way back then, we planted a lot of them because it was a great tree to have. They grew fast, they were magnificent. But after this invasive disease rolled through, whole communities lost all their trees. And it was quite a devastating loss in terms of tree canopy. And after that, we ended up planting a lot of ash trees. And we also already had ash trees just in our native environment. And it was until 2002 when the emerald ash borer was discovered in North America and wiped out tens of millions of ash trees and counting. So we've really learned our lesson of not just planting one tree, because there's a lot of other looming threats out there. Oak wilt is on the rise, which is threatening our oak species in our region. Climate change is drastically changing how we can think about what's going to survive in the next 100 years. Maybe something that survived 50 years ago isn't going to be in this region, but there's a lot of unknowns. So we need to keep these things in mind as we're planning for the future. The spotted lanternfly is kind of known as the next big invasive pest, but they feed on maples, walnuts, willows, a whole host of genuses of trees. So I say all this to stress that the future is unclear, and managers need to be prepared to avoid catastrophic losses to canopy, which is why species diversity is so important. Again, this is data from your parks, so not your village right-of-ways, but just to put it in perspective as to what your canopy kind of looks like from the data we have. So compared to other municipalities in your region, you have a lot more oaks than other communities, which is excellent in terms of oak preference. And, you know, we were an oak ecosystem before. And it makes sense too, because oaks tend to do better in more naturalized areas. So this is your park settings. But you all also have about 21% of maples, 11% of ash, some hickory and spruce thrown in there, and then some other. I share this just to kind of give an idea of where you're at right now. But as you gain more insight with more additional inventory information, you'll be able to plan a bit more for the future and what you want your species diversity to look like. So in general, from the Morton Arboretum and the Chicago Region Trees Initiative, given all the threats and unknowns out there, diverse species composition protects you from catastrophic loss in the future. So just to put it in perspective, in a small scale planting like the ones that we do, we generally recommend a ratio of not more than 15% of any one family, 10% of any one genus, or 5% of any one species. Now, this isn't a goal necessarily to have as a village. Like I wouldn't say apply this necessarily to your species list, but just keep this kind of ratio in mind about, you know, what managers are really going through when they're choosing a species to plant, along with the location and along with the idea of kind of these threats that could happen to threaten the resiliency of your urban forest. So my advice moving forward, you know, as you're going through this, is really defining clear goals for your community. So think about where where your department is planting. Is it a natural area that can deal with more native species and rare species and maybe house some of those? Or is it a really developed area where you want to, enjoy the benefits of trees, enjoy the flood reduction, the heat reduction, the air quality improvement, but maybe it's not a native species because it would do better with the salt tolerance. So think about where you're actually planting and don't limit yourself. Secondly, what threats do you need to be aware of in the future to maintain a resilient urban forest? There's a lot of invasive species out there, like I mentioned, climate change and other stressors, such as the actual physical planting space. And thirdly, think about, what do you want to achieve? Is your priority canopy cover? Is it flood reduction or heat reduction or ecological restoration? It could be all of these things, but depending on what your actual goals are, that may determine the species that you would like to choose for your species list. And finally, and this is an important one, and it's really easy to forget, right? When we're walking down the street or walking, your dog in the neighborhood and you see all these beautiful trees and you're like, why aren't they planting this tree? I love this tree so much. Think about the costs and stakeholders that need to be considered. These trees are purchased from real nurseries that, maybe a certain tree didn't do well that year. Or maybe certain species are just simply too far away, or maybe we wanted to encourage local nursery collaboration. So thinking about nursery availability, the village budget, perhaps the previous inventory, and trusting the experts, trusting certified arborists to make these decisions about what trees we're planting. So moving forward, it's all about the right tree in the right place. And the resource that I have recommended for you is called the Northern Illinois Tree Species List. So this is a really full list of trees that would do well in the region, but it's really great because it's a third-party list, so it's updated with the information that we have coming through the Morton Arboretum, but it also lists the tolerances of trees. So it lists whether or not, what kind of environment it would do well in, and it understands the site limitations that are important when selecting a tree species. So this is a free resource that anyone can view online, and I can share it with you after this meeting. But it's a really helpful way to start and know what would do well in the region and also what certain tree tolerances are. And finally, to wrap up, there are a few more resources that I'd like to share with you. The first is the Plant Clinic. So if you guys are not interested in starting in using a third-party list, the Plant Clinic can help you create a list from another third-party list. There's also a really great feature where they have a newsletter that goes out about new threats in the region and learning about what trees would be best to plant at a given time, and they can really help. If you're more interested in learning about why we're pushing for species diversity and why that's the most economical choice and resilient choice for an urban forest, I really recommend reading Urban Forest by Jill Jones. It's a wonderful natural history of trees and people in America, and especially touches upon Dutch elm disease and lessons learned from the Emerald Ash borer. There's the Selecting and Planting Trees guidebook that I can also share. And finally, like I said, the Northern Illinois Tree Species List. So that is it for me. That is the expertise I'd like to offer you as you are going through this together, and I'm really happy to see community engagement in this discussion. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you. With the consensus of the committee, I'd like to have a little internal discussion, turn it over to the audience, and then close back with the committee. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll open it up to questions that we have for our speaker tonight.
Could you, I've got a question if I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Mike Bushio. Could you comment on the resources needed going forward to maintain and nurture the trees? I know a lot of communities, plant the trees and then, stressors take over or something, and there's no funds to do proper pruning or proper feeding or proper pest control for the trees. Could you just comment on, is there a percent of budget or something that should also be considered?
Yeah, so I can't really speak upon like percent of budget to be considered because it really depends on the community and how much, like how many trees you have as a community. I would say as a benchmark, Tree City USA requires that you spend $2 per capita on a tree in order to even qualify for Tree City USA. So that's a really great goal. I would say that's pretty achievable for Lake Bluff, and I imagine you already spend that. So there's growth awards that you can get from Tree City USA for spending even more. And I agree, it's really surprising how much money goes into taking care of your tree infrastructure. However, the payout over the long term is certainly worth it. So again, it would depend on the specific community and your own management plan, which I'm in discussion with you guys about. But yeah, I would go off the Tree City USA guidelines for that.
As we've been putting together kind of our recommended species list for this community, there's been somewhat of a debate. Basically, we've done our best to do a focus on native trees. Excuse me, my voice is not so great. So we've been focusing on native trees, but we know that with the rise of temperature, with the oncoming climate change, that there's been somewhat of a shift towards promoting non-native trees that are probably a little more tolerant to higher temperatures and what most scientists are projecting. I wonder if you might be able to speak on sort of the debate that goes with native trees versus trees that might not be native, but more tolerant to the stresses that the environment is presenting with us right now. Could you give us your opinion on that?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. And we are in debates about this all the time. But as I said, the position of the CRTI is species diversity through and through. Because we just don't know what the future holds, and because trees are so important to our communities and our livelihood, it's just too big of a risk to only do native species if that's not your goal. So if you as a village decide that you want to push for native initiatives in certain areas, that's great. But when it comes to urban forestry and the stressors that urban trees deal with, and the availability of trees at a nursery and all the other stakeholders involved, species diversity is definitely the step forward for the future. And it's a really challenging time to make these kind of decisions. There's a lot of debate about assisted migration, and I can't necessarily speak on that, but if your goal is to have a healthy and resilient and greener urban canopy that benefits your communities for years to come, then species diversity with non-problematic species that may be non-native is definitely the pathway forward. Now, you may decide that some naturalized areas, your goal isn't that. Your goal may be ecological restoration, in which case native species may be the way to go. But when it comes to, your run-of-the-mill street tree, municipal, I recommend species diversity.
Yeah, I mean, we're all about diversity with species. I was just curious to hear, why not natives, and just your opinion.
Yeah, I would say the limitation factor of it. Native trees, the list of native trees that can deal with certain stressors of the urban environment and are also native, that list just gets smaller and smaller. So we don't want to limit the benefits that we can get when a tree might be giving the same benefits, but is just simply non-native. So the goal is to expand the possibilities, both as an economic choice and a practical choice.
Two questions. So one, I mean, wouldn't it make sense as well to be looking at native trees maybe that have occurred a little south of us and start looking at planting some of those? And we're also not Chicago, so we're not quite as urban, and I think we can do a lot more with natives here that are successful as well. And I forgot my second one.
Yeah, I cannot formally speak about like assisted migration and what species would be best. I really just recommend using the resources I've listed here and talking with the plant clinic about specific species. You know, my background is in ecological restoration, so personally I favor native trees through and through, but I also know it's all about the right tree in the right place. So when you're forming something such as a species list, perhaps you give preference to native trees while allowing some flexibility in your management style.
And do you guys make any recommendations around, I know some of the suggestions coming out today suggest if you're planting trees, you should plant in groups of 3 because they actually do well as a community and their roots intermingle and they are stronger. Do you guys have recommendations around that or not yet?
No, not necessarily, not in this environment. At least, I don't personally, I'm not a scientist, so I can certainly connect you with our science and conservation, but we're not recommending anything like that right now.
It gets really wet here. We have a lot of flooding and trees fall as a result. So there could be some argument for that to help them be stronger, withstand these dramatic storm events that are more frequent.
Yeah, I think that goes to a question that I have is that, you know, you look at the aggregate in terms of diversity, like 15% of that and 10% of this. But I think, as you were mentioning, you know, we might look at certain areas like, okay, this particular park should have a lot of natives. Maybe the street area should do that. But, you know, I think it would take a lot of planning to think about where do we take that diversity down to? You know, like in front of Village Hall, do we plant all maples or should it be 3 maples and 3 of this? Should certain areas have mixtures and maybe you plant a group and you don't have a diversity, say in a small area, just because you're going for something. I'm not sure how we take those recommendations down to a smaller level and decide what goes where out of that. Because you can look at the total aggregation and say, yeah, we're diverse, but maybe in a whole park at a school might be destroyed by some pest because they planted all trees there. So I think I'm curious to see how once we get the tree list, how we spread that around town and who gets what and where it goes where.
Is some of that guidance available through the grant, or as we have specific projects, do we go to the plant clinic and they provide guidance? I don't know.
So you'll learn a lot from your inventory, I'm sure, because you'll have the location and species and age diversity too. We didn't even go into that. From your inventory, so that will be critical information to really set a foundation for intentional planting, because you'll be able to see not only what you have but where it is, so you'll be able to plan your plantable spaces in the future much more strategically.
Yes, you know, I'd like to say 2 things. One is for centuries, we've thought of trees as a resource for humans, that we should select trees because they benefit us. And there's a change in that thinking, in that we select trees because it benefits all the species, you know, from the fungus to the insects to the tiniest things to, you know, an oak, which is a keystone species. You know, so I want to be sure to inject that into this conversation, that we're talking about trees that will benefit us. And I think we need to think bigger than that. I think we need to think about trees that are going to benefit the whole ecosystem and then, as a result, benefit us. So I wanted to put that in there. The other thing is we all have flood reduction on our minds. And I wondered if you could elaborate on the role that trees play in flood reduction, specifically what they do, and if there are trees that are really best to serve that purpose of flood reduction.
Yes. So first, just to its core, so the way trees help with stormwater and flood reduction is when the rain is actually falling from the sky, the surface area on the tree and the leaves, actually captures or, holds the water. So it's almost like a physical screening. Like if you stand under a tree during a rainstorm, you stay actually pretty dry, especially if it's summertime. That's one way. The other is just the uptake and storage of the tree in the tree trunk itself. And in terms of flood reduction, uh, trees that do really well in flooding are great for that kind of thing. Like especially during, like if we have a planting and maybe there's, I'm on a planting site and the partner is saying, we always get this huge flow of water right here and it always floods our loam. So I would say plant a bald cypress because bald cypresses love that kind of environment, and they're set to do really well in this area, and especially dealing with flooding. So there's a whole host of trees like that that are really good in those areas, but a willow is really good in that environment too. But you might not want to plant a willow because the wood is really weak. So maybe that would be better for a park setting, if at all. So there's definitely a lot of trees. Swamp white oak is also great in a flooding scenario. But you might not want to plant a swamp white oak in a place that maybe there's a lot of flooding around it, but it's up on top of a hill because all that water is flowing down the hill. So it's not going to do well as a tree. So it really is that site specific, and it's all about the right tree in the right place.
And one other little question there is, how big does a tree have to be to make a difference? Big, or how old does it have to be?
Yeah, so you ever hear that quote that's the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the next best time is right now. All the trees we plant are really going to benefit our children, and the benefits realized by a large mature tree are so huge, and when you really get into the math of it, you realize how much a tree is really doing when it's 30 years old or 20 years old. I can't say exactly the year that a tree, actually starts accruing benefits because it kind of depends. But it's certainly not for at least 5, if not 10 years.
Great.
So it really is planning for the future of Lake Bluff and of your community. But there are really specific ways to calculate that. You can use the iTree tool, where you can actually measure around a tree with a measuring tape, say the species, and it would tell you exactly how much carbon it sequestered, stormwater management, stormwater mitigation it has done, and actually quantify the benefits of that specific tree. So it's a really cool tool. We've done it with school kids to learn about the benefits of trees. People do it for assessments about valuing a tree after it was unlawfully removed. So there's a couple ways to go about it, but it certainly does take time to realize those benefits.
Okay, thank you very much.
Did you have another question? Okay.
Good.
Okay. I want to open up this audience, but Drew and Jake, does anyone from the village want to speak at this time on our current status of things?
How's everybody doing? Jake Turlap, Public Works Superintendent. Hey, Colette, how you doing? What Colette's talking about tonight, what we got the grant for, and then what we're going to learn a lot about, and this is what's coming our way, is that once we're done with the inventory, and that will develop the work plan from there. And that's really going to tell us where we want to go next. Like right now, up until this point, when trees come down, we've always backfilled, right? And size of the department, usually we do about 20 to 30 trees a year. That's what we can keep up with. That's what we can handle. So moving forward, now we're going to have like a work plan. So the work plan not only is going to help us fill in the spots, increase our diversity, but I think also what Colette was speaking about and some of the questions were coming about, Should we have certain species here and then we'll diversify here, we'll do this here, we'll do this here? Well, that's already there, right? The puzzle's already out there. We got to put the last of the pieces back in there. A job that's not going to happen overnight either. You know, some people say it's a 5-year work plan. For us to knock out something like Lake Bluff in 5 years, that's not going to happen. I mean, we just need to be realistic about how that would work. And, but I think this is where we're going to learn the most is the updated inventory. Right now, our inventory is old, partially upkept, partially right here. You know, I have a lot of institutional knowledge. I've been here a long time. One of the things you'll see on our street trees is we're about 24% maple right now. Well, me personally, besides a couple here and there, we haven't planted maple in 15 years. We've always, because I have a little thing in my office. If there's a maple disease, I pull it out and it's my resignation letter because I'm not going through it again. we already did emerald ash borer, and that was a rough one. You know, that was tough. All of a sudden you turned around and, you know, things were going fast. So I think what we're really going to get a plan going forward for the next at least 5 to 6 years. And I think this is going to be something that we can really use. And on top of it, it's just going to be a good thing to have our inventory fully updated. Now, also keep in mind with this inventory and what Colette's talking about a lot, we're talking about our street trees. We're not going into your yard. We're not talking about that part on this. We're only talking about what we have on the parkways and village-owned land. So the other thing is like the park district, the golf course, artesian park, those things, we don't do that. That's not in our, you know, it's not village-owned, so we don't maintain that or take care of that. At the park district, we're going to do something like that. They don't have as much land, probably wouldn't be as tough, but
But they're responsible for the ravines, correct? The park district?
depends. Look, ravines are an interesting animal. Some is
Yes.
privately owned, some is park district owned. We own a little bit.
They're also probably the biggest ecological challenge that Lake Bluff faces right now, with maybe the beach and the bluff kind of being a major one as well. So I'm curious why, has the park district been approached with this project in terms of any sort of inventory? It feels like we're doing half the piece of the Lake Bluff puzzle a little bit. Have we talked to them at all?
No, I don't, you know, I cannot speak for the park district.
Right. Have they been has the village approached them at all, or no? Yes. We have. Thank you, Drew. And their response is, we have no money for this?
That's a lot of
Well-
people's response.
I'm just trying to get,
Yeah,
I'm trying to
recollection
understand.
is
Yeah,
when
yeah.
we started down this pathway pursuing this grant, we talked to the park district and maybe even the school district and advised them, hey, we're doing this. You may want to jump in if you can. And I think at the time it was a lack of funds. But it doesn't mean they can't pursue it another time. And I think they are actually working with a consultant revisiting the Ravine
Some
Park
areas, yeah.
inventory right now.
And it's not like they couldn't
one they
piggyback off of
control.
what we're doing, right? I mean,
But with regards to when they can or do replace trees, will they be following our list? Or are they kind of independent on that?
They are independent on what they choose to plant on their property, with the exception of what we plant on their property for Arbor Day.
Arbor Day.
So again, the foundation is getting our inventory complete and up to date, and all the pieces of the inventory that includes geolocation. It's really pretty impressive, but I think what would be great in the future if the park district and other institutions could do that and use our same software that we're kind of using the current contemporary standard, and it's Davy
Davy
Tree.
Tree Keepers, so in all honesty, I mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
In all honesty, I mean, maybe in the future, they could piggyback in. I mean, if I remember the agreement properly, I mean, we have as many, you can have, if you have a contractor working, you can give them access and they can type in the work they did and whatnot. And again, I don't think Davey would ever know if we put the park district trees on there or not. And we could
Unless they
have
pay attention to this meeting.
unless they're watching.
Yeah.
But you could always just have, a certain identifier as park district or something like that. I mean, maybe in the future.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get the holistic picture of the trees in Lake Bluff, right? And I know that the ravines are a large footprint of what the trees are here in Lake Bluff.
And where the water travels.
Yeah,
Well, I also wonder, and I want the data to be good. I mean, good data in, good data out.
Yeah.
Whether there's an opportunity for people in the community who have some experience in trees to participate and volunteer in identifying inventory outside of Lake Bluff and the schools and the park districts, and maybe even in their own homes and their neighbors' homes, be willing to join in kind of a larger inventory. Secondarily, I think that without financial commitment, the park district and the school district could vote to adopt our species list and our plan, just so that at least they have a playbook, that we're working off the same playbook without committing to, a certain amount of plantings every year.
I mean, I'm not trying to hold anybody's feet to the fire, but when we're talking about diversity of trees in Lake Bluff, and we're not taking the largest footprint of trees in Lake Bluff, it kind of feels like half of the job is being done a little bit. And I mean, I can go to the park district and say, be a part of this. I don't know if they'll listen to me, but and I guess I really have no
If I may,
solution to this.
just for a second. So the graphs that you saw were from a 2016 inventory of the Lake Bluff Park District. So if they've been updating their inventory, they may have available information for you that you could use to get that full picture, especially after you are done completing your inventory as well.
Okay, good to know that we have something at least.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
start.
Just the point that this inventory, like Jake said, we've had an inventory for years. I think that's one of the requirements for Tree City USA.
Yeah.
So, but this inventory is much more detailed than any inventory we've ever had. So we're excited about it getting that done and giving us the data to go out and write this plan, which we will probably bring back and share with you. Here's what staff's created, looking just for a blessing on that at some point soon.
And also in the line of budget, when they talk about Tree City USA doing the $2 per capita, I think, I do this application every year. I think we're at like $121 per capita. So I mean, we're spending over what most people, now sometimes that jumps up. Like we bought a new bucket truck, right? We just hit a big number in our budget at one point, and that will go down a little bit next year because we're not gonna make another giant purchase like that. But no, we're up there. Our budget for forestry is healthy. It's healthy. We probably spend, I mean, just as a public works department, we don't have a separate forestry department. It's just us doing what we do. We probably spend a good 25 to 30% of our time on forestry. It's because it is one of the biggest things you see around town, right? It's in your face. You see it every day, everywhere you go, So it is somewhere where we spend a lot of time.
See, Drew, I had a follow-up question for you. You mentioned that the new tree survey has a lot more detail. Can you describe some of the detail that we're going to see in this new survey?
I know Colette could, and I know Claire maybe could.
Okay.
Colette, the standards for the grant, all the requirements for the inventory.
Yes. Yeah, so I'm not sure what you had previously, but in terms of the inventory project that you guys are doing, you're going to get the species, the age, which is really important, the whether or not something is a safety hazard, so a track rating, you're going to get the land type, and a few other variables. Of which I can look up for you. But I think trees are constantly changing. So whether or not, however many variables you guys committed to, it's more a matter of that you're doing it again. Inventories do need to be updated because there may be a new tree that, is a harm to the community and needs to be removed or pruned. So it's really going to inform your management decisions moving forward. And also plantable spaces. So that's another variable that you may pursue and will definitely benefit like the speed at which you continue to plant trees in your community. I also just want to touch upon where you're at as a community in Lake Bluff. So CRTI creates summaries about your canopy specifically for every community in the Chicagoland region. So there is one that we just updated this year for Lake Bluff. So I'm happy to share that 3-pager about how you compare to other communities. I would say in terms of your spending, you are absolutely a model community in the eyes of CRTI and how you're managing your trees, the fact that you have certified arborists. It's really fantastic, and we want to support you in maintaining your amazing canopy for years to come.
Thank you. I know there's a number of people in the audience that would probably like to ask some questions or make comments. Please come up when you do to the podium, give your name and address, and George doesn't need any introduction.
Hi, I'm George Russell, resident of 448 Gurney Avenue. One quick comment about the ravines. I'm absolutely certain that the Park District percentage of the ravines is under 10%. The vast majority of the footprint of the ravines in the village is private property. So it's not like they're going to be able to solve all the problems if they come in. And I think Colette mentioned they did do an extensive tree inventory about 6 years ago. So hopefully I don't know the status of the maintenance of that inventory, but they did do a tree inventory. Even Ravine Park, they probably only own 30% of the footprint of Ravine Park. So it's not as large as one might think. So
The park district's percentage, but the ravine footprint itself, I'm not just talking about that actual park district owned land.
Right.
Yeah.
okay. And then I'm retired. I spend more time looking up, but it seems to me that the oaks in town are dying at an ever alarming and increasing rate. I'm assuming that it is oak wilt. There's a massive area in the southwest corner of Crabtree Farms where there's been dozens of trees that have died off. I'm assuming that's oak wilt, but I'm not sure. We have some really magnificent oaks in town in our public right-of-ways. We have 6 big, large oaks right in our downtown area here. What I would like to know is if there is a specific menu of activities, proactive things that the village can do to extend the life of these trees. Are there types of feedings that can be done to ward off oak wilt or to help prevent oak wilt? And I know there's a lot of literature that once a tree gets oak wilt, you're supposed to remove or root prune everything around it down to a depth of 5 feet or something. It's pretty extensive, and immediately take down the tree that has the oak wilt. But I'm talking about identifying the biggest and the best and the most loved trees in our town, and then coming up with a list of things that should be done to enhance the possibility that they won't contract these diseases. So I don't know. I did some brief research the last couple days, seeing this on the agenda, and I couldn't find a specific list of things that could be done to enhance and extend the life of the mature oaks. So I'm hoping that if there are things that dendrologists believe will help the trees, then I hope we find out what they are, and that some of the money is spent doing that, because I would rather have one big magnificent oak survive for 75 more years than worry about 10 little ones. Thanks.
Thank you.
You know what, I have a question in regards to what George was saying, is that, there's oak wilt and then there's oak decline. And those are 2 different things, is my understanding. And as far as George's question about what could be done, I know there are several things. We treat our oaks with Cambistat every 3 years, and it's an interesting treatment, and an arborist, or perhaps you could tell us more about it, but we feel like that's a strong way to prevent the oaks from dying. It's an interesting story I won't get into, but have you heard about this?
That would be I want to say I am not a certified arborist, so
Okay.
that would be a question for the plant clinic. My role is grant administration, but yes, I have heard of some remediating strategies that you can do, and just in terms of oak wilt versus oak decline. I believe oak decline is speaking to how we have all of these really aging oaks that have been around for a long time that are maybe aging out. So it's a matter of replenishing and making sure we have a age diverse urban forest as well. And when I say age diverse, I mean, planting every year so that multiple age groups of the trees exist.
Marietta, and George, I'd like to comment on your thoughts because we have a lot of oaks on our property. We live on 2 ravines. And I'm not an arborist, but we've had Davy tree out. And as Marietta said earlier, trees are living creatures like us. As we age and if we're under stress, we are more prone to illness and disease. So what they told us is the key is to try and make sure your trees are not stressed. And what are the stressors for trees? Well, right now we're in a pretty drought time, and so water is really important for the trees. Soil compaction is a big impact from construction, just over time. So, making sure you aerate, deep aeration, air aeration, so you're not disturbing the roots with digging. And then a lot of organic compost to promote, additional root growth off the main tubers, if you will. Just to try and keep the tree as healthy as you can to avoid the stressor. So the weak trees are the ones that are getting the oak stress and the oak wilt. And unfortunately, a lot of our oaks are old, and we've had a lot of dry, stressful times, in the last decade. And so, we're seeing that impacted. So that's my thought. What we're doing to try and preserve the ones that we have, which I think gets back to my other point about making sure as a village that we do set aside funds for the maintenance and the care and feeding of these legacy trees, so we're not losing the big ones and replacing them with 5 1-inch ones that our grandkids will benefit from. And you have to invest. It's expensive to feed and maintain these trees.
And there's
so
no
you
guarantee.
have to budget
Yeah.
for it. You really have to budget for it. Yeah.
Drew, did you
I
have?
will also add one more thing. There are preventative measures you can have for oak wilt, and that's a matter of the time of the year you're pruning, because opening up a tree wound by pruning an oak in springtime can really open it up for that fungus. So there are certain management decisions informed that could be informed by your management plan and trained certified arborists to ensure that you're pruning your trees at the right time so that they are not as susceptible to diseases such as oak wilt.
And that's already in the village's code about when we trim oaks and so forth. So I know we do it, we have that. To your point, we are doing that, I would say, on a limited basis. We've been nursing some ash trees and some bur oaks around town. We've been doing that already, but I'm optimistic that once we get this complete inventory, we'll have a much more prescriptive part that we can back up and then put the resources there to keep it going.
Thank you, Drew. Any more questions?
Nikki Collins, 217 East Scranton. And so,
Here, I'll just,
And
Ann
I have-
Verdebeck, 335 Briar Lane. And Roz Jovanovich, 348 East Woodland.
so Drew and Jake they've heard this from us before, and we've actually had a really nice working relationship, working with them to see what we can do as kind of, citizens of Lake Bluff to help plant more trees. We are very, very interested in natives, and I was really happy to hear a lot of your comments because, I was struck, the presentation where there was a section that showed urban trees with, sidewalks and saying it's a really challenging growth environment. Well, we have like 3 blocks of that. I think some good guidance from Morton Arboretum on really how to grow trees successfully in a sidewalk would be much appreciated. It would be really valuable because I think those little trees in our downtown are, by block 1, have been replaced 2 or 3 times. But anyway, we don't have heavily salted streets. I've seen things in your literature about like red oak shouldn't be they're not great street trees. We have lots of red oaks on our parkways. So we don't have quite the challenging environment that I think, might apply to a lot of other communities. And I just have to, you brought up the question of what do we want to achieve? And the thing that I didn't hear, we love the canopy, the shade, all the greater property values, all wonderful. But we also want to support the ecosystem. And Sophia kind of touched on that. And that's important to us. I mean, we've got this huge insect die-off, and that's leading, we're seeing it reflected in bird population die-off. And we're big fans of Doug Tallamy. Sue Raymer didn't make it here tonight, I guess, but she kind of organized a group of us who all read Nature's Best Hope.
She did submit a letter that she was.
She did submit a letter. Well, okay, great. Didn't get to see it myself. That's I think way up high. I mean, I think you can achieve all those other great aspects of an urban forest with a palette of native trees. I actually did, and I've shared it around. I probably shared it with Drew, and I'm willing to email it to your committee. And this is not an end-all, be-all list, but I just did it because often we got questions of what tree should we plant, what would be a good native tree, and it's actually based on, various tree lists that communities around us have, but also a Morton Arboretum publication, which is the plants of the Chicago region. Now there's a new enormous edition out called Flora of the Chicago region, I guess. But that's, you can just see by studying the many, many species that are already found here in Lake County. We have choices, and then if we really do want to worry about the climate warming a bit, we can go a county or two south, right? We don't really have to bring in London plane trees and ginkgos, and so anyway, you can pass this around, but this.
Thank you.
That's just a sample of what can be grown here. So oaks, I guess I have a real hard time figuring out why it seems like Morton Arboretum has two different initiatives going, and they're almost at odds with each other. So there's the whole, it's quite a big report, the Chicago Wilderness Oak Ecosystems Recovery Plan, and it's how important oaks are to the Chicago region because it is the keystone species. This was an oak forest. And if you read in it, you're supposed to, plant oaks across the full range of urban sites in which they could be successful. And that just seems kind of at odds with that incredibly strict recipe for diversity, where you could have very few oaks that you plant. And it seems to me like that this diversity thing is kind of just looking at it as a math problem. Well, you don't want to lose more than 10% of your trees, so don't plant more than 10% of this whole species or this genus, right? But I guess I would say the other way to address it as a math problem is just plant a lot more trees. And then if you lose, a certain percentage of your trees, it's not as catastrophic. So I like the fact that you've brought up the funding. I don't know. I mean, I guess we're doing okay, but I know, I feel, having looked at the record of how many trees we planted year after year and how many trees we took down, we've been developing this deficit. Emerald ash borer was just a huge hit to us, and we just haven't kept up. Drew knows this. We've talked about it a lot. A 5-year plan is great, but I wish we'd plant a whole lot more sooner than that, right? We've got long stretches of our parkways. If you walk around Lake Bluff, you'll see them. So we need to get more trees in the ground faster. And I love if you're going to take a look at what a good forestry budget would be, I think that would be great, because maybe you could pass that information along to the village board and help them as they budget in the coming years. Because we have a great public works crew. They're working very hard. Maybe they need a little more funding. Maybe they need one more person. I don't want to make it sound like our village isn't trying and aren't doing their best. And one last little bit of information is we had when was it, April, I think? We had a panel of arborists meet at the library and then just discuss how to, it was just kind of a public information discussion. And I think we had 40 people show up for it, so there's big interest here. But how to care for your trees, what you can do. And I did share the, Drew, and Jake, I think I shared the minutes of that with you, or the notes from it. If not, I'm happy to get it in your hands, and then, it can be distributed to everybody. We had some great tips that were shared. So I'm going to ask I'm sorry if I took anybody's subject matter, but would you guys like to say some things?
I just thought I'd define us. We're part of the growing native Lake Bluff community, and we are all involved in the representative garden in Artesian that's native plants. And I'll put one other plug in. July 2nd, we're going to have a native garden walk so that people can see the native plants too. And of course, Marietta, I love that you commented on the need for protecting the whole ecosystem, including the insects. And that is one of the concerns with bringing in plants from the south. And I know that is still very controversial. She brought The Power of Trees by Peter Wohlleben, who is actually in Germany, but they're addressing the same issue. And his feeling, and from other researchers, is that we have underestimated the knowledge of trees, how trees communicate, how trees stress themselves, teach each other the stresses and help communicate. And I think the more we have intact groups of trees, you mentioned the 3 together, but trees that are daughters and adults, they have a better chance of survival, frankly, because they're teaching each other. That's been proven. They respond to deer that come in, and they change the chemistry of their leaves so they're less tasty, that sort of thing. So one inexpensive alternative, or something we could do in addition to what we're talking about, is that last fall we collected many oaks, little acorns, and we have a local nursery who is growing them. And in about 2 years, they're going to be available, right? 2 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have 185 white oaks, 475 bur oaks, and 98 red oaks growing right now. And I believe we have first dibs on
Yeah, we're
some
not
of them.
obligated to buy them, but we do get first dibs.
Yeah.
And these are from some of our heritage trees, the really big ones. And that's what the research that's described in this book says, that the acorns from a tree that has been through stress previously in its life, like trees actually learn. So if they go through a drought, they learn how to deal with drought. And then, very amazingly, the acorns grow trees that actually have that knowledge, and they will deal better with drought. So we're very excited about the fact that we might actually have, kind of a new family off of our heritage trees.
That we can
That we
bring
can
back.
grow, that we can bring back and
Yeah.
plant. Yeah.
And my only other point is that in areas where we can make it like a little forest, we should allow the babies to grow as opposed to mowing them down. Only in areas that we can, because then we're naturally, inexpensively bringing the trees in for the future. Thank you. I just have a couple questions, actually. So one of the questions is regarding the resources that you're being given to create this species list. Is there a resource that does address this tree will support this many species? Because we're talking about species diversity in trees, but we're also, as Marietta and others have said, we're talking about species diversity in general. So in the resources that you're providing or the plant clinic, are they going to be getting that? Or I use like a tool online in my own garden where I literally go and look it up and I'm like, oh yes, this one's $4.95. I'm gonna plant that instead of this one that's $3. So is that gonna be part of this decision process? So that's my first question. Is it part of the tool that they're being
provided?
So that's up to them. I will say for the Northern Illinois tree species list, it does say what benefits it provides in terms of insects and wildlife. Not specific to what insects or the number. You have to research that specific tree species, but definitely consideration. I'd also like to speak upon a few things. First of all, I am absolutely loving this discussion. Like for residents to show up and care so much about like natural landscapes is just like making my heart soar. So really appreciate the discussion, the research, and the passion. And I would like to speak upon just the idea of our conflating goals in terms of restoring oak ecosystems and prioritizing oaks. We celebrate Oaktober at CRTI. We are all about oaks. We love oaks, but we also have that broader view of knowing that, you know, municipalities have an interest in maintaining their infrastructure. And sometimes, you know, as formal recommendations, not just for Lake Bluff, right? We're also recommending, you know, our recommendations are meant to be adapted to what the community is. So, you know, we love oaks, we celebrate oaks, we should plant oaks throughout the region, but we also don't want to limit ourselves, at least in our recommendations, especially when it comes to municipalities that may have other goals in mind, especially when there may be non-native trees that also support the insects and birds here. So just kind of coming at it from a wider view in terms of that. But yes, that oak ecosystem recovery plan, also a really excellent resource. And again, just in terms of, you know, the other benefits trees are providing, the Northern Illinois tree species list does touch upon the other benefits provided to wildlife in terms of pollination and insects and wildlife, but for the specific number, you would have to probably use the tool, and I'd love to hear what it is.
Okay, thanks. So the other question is kind of technical as well. It's about the tree canopy report that you mentioned that would just be coming out. The question is like, how does like buckthorn work? So if we're seeing our tree canopies growing, but it's like this invasive stuff that's horrible for the, you know, exactly, or the maples that aren't good in our ravines, Norway maples, thank you. Does it differentiate that? Do we know what's in there?
Yeah, so that will be, so a couple things. I might be getting mixed up with the current study we're doing now because the Chicagoland tree census that we did differentiated tree by stem and how much buckthorn is out there. And also, so our LIDAR analysis can go down all the way to the species of buckthorn, and buckthorn is a huge issue. But in terms of your municipal summary that's available now, I'd have to double check. I don't think it goes by species, but yeah, I can look into that for you.
My point would just be like, it might look really good, right? Because we got a great canopy,
yeah,
but maybe it isn't.
Yeah, I would say so. I'd say that's a challenge for any LiDAR analysis, right? Because we're just like doing an overhead view, which is why an on the ground tree inventory to confirm those numbers is so essential.
Okay, and then finally, I just wanted to thank the village because I have two little saplings in my parkway right now, and I'm really excited about that, and they look fantastic, and I think my neighbors are happy too. So I think we're all moving in the right direction. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Anyone else? Okay, I'd like to bring it back to the committee for final discussion and then go from there. So one of the things I'm not a tree expert, but in my job, I do study climate change quite a bit. I'm in the building industry. My personal view, and I know that it's debatable. I hate to use the word controversial because I think it's been settled. It's just a matter of debate among the level. I think the climate change is going to come more rapidly than we think and more severely than we think in terms of not only affecting the environment that would be for trees, but also species, animals, insects are going to change a lot more rapidly. My personal view is that a county south is probably not enough forward thinking. If we're looking at trees that are 20, 30, 40, 100 years in the future. I think that our species, at least from a diversity standpoint, should look at trees that can handle that. Part of it is that the climate change is happening so rapidly that adaptation is difficult for anything in these environments. You know, when we have, when they change the 100 years to 10 years flood events, when we get 500-year events like we did last year that are off the charts, that kind of extreme stress and extreme change may require us to look at planting certain percentage of the trees that can handle that right now and not waiting for them to adapt and learn. That's just my personal view. I'm not a tree expert, but I do study climate a lot. So I think as we go through these lists, it is important for us to look at what type of trees could handle, and it's not just a temperature rise. We're seeing a temperature rise. It's the wild fluctuations all the time. It's the high winds. It's the tornadoes. It's the floods. It's the temperature range. A month of drought and really high temperatures. I think it's important for us to look at that. The other thing I would like to say on some positive things with regards to species, I don't know if most of you know, we passed the leaf blower ordinance trying to improve the environment for species, for insects. We are currently working on a model lighting ordinance because we know how light pollution and certain types of lighting, color lighting, affects species and insects. And we want to improve that for the village. And last thing, I don't know if you heard, is that we're in the process of the Bird City USA, which is an important thing that we encourage the board to go ahead and go for the full application. I don't know, Drew's still here, but I know that's being worked on, right? Yes. So that's very important. It all ties together. Everything this committee's doing really looks at all of that and tries to create a whole environment for trees. So that's all I wanted to add.
I think you bring up a really good point about the temperature fluctuations on both ends. Even though global temperatures are proven to be rising, it's important to remember that we're making these decisions. We also see extremes on the cold end as well. And so when we're trying to look for trees that are more tolerant to heat, we need to make sure that they're also more tolerant to extreme cold. We get extreme cold in Lake Bluff, that, that Arctic, I forget the name of it, the polar vortex, yes. We get hit by that almost every other year, it feels like. So as we're making those decisions towards, we should look for trees that are warmer, it pushes me back towards the more native plants to this region to be able to handle those. Like we're talking about, the heritage trees are familiar with how to handle those temperature extremes, so.
Yeah, again, I'm not a tree expert. I want, as we look at these, to go, yeah, -10 or 110, or certain types of insects moving from the south up here that just as the overall temperature change, or the extremes, the high winds or this, that we look at those, because I think, as was mentioned, we want to maintain the canopy. We don't want to lose vast swatches of parts of it. And I think diversity does play a role, and I also think that plant as many trees as we can is important. I'm glad to hear the village has such a notable ranking within the area for how much it invests per capita for trees, and I think grant money it's just amazing to get. So
I think all of us are very proud that Lake Bluff is a Tree City USA, and I think we have the village to thank for making sure that we continue that status and be so successful at it, so. Thanks, Jake.
anything?
The only thing I want to add, and it's something we don't really need to get into, but this idea of native is going to be changing. If we're bringing trees that do well, are native in Kentucky, but because of climate change, we have to take those Kentucky trees and move them up to Illinois, are they native anymore? I mean, I don't know where that's going to go. And on a simpler topic, we were talking about how to take care of our trees and keep them healthy. One of the easiest things you can do is back up your lawn off the tree. So if you really want to be fantastic, you look at the drip line where the canopy stops, and you open up all of that ground so that you've got lawn going right up to a tree trunk. The tree isn't happy. And neither are all the little insects and birds and everything that rely on that tree. And a nice way to do that, if you don't want to look at dirt, is to put plants there. Just plant plants, it looks lovely. And so, I mean, that's the other tip I have is if you're thinking about how we can make our trees happier. I have personal experience with some trees that we had where the lawn was right up, and sadly, a mower scraped part of the bark off and that side of the tree died. But the other tree grew at an unbelievable rate as soon as we took the lawn back. It was really exciting to see. And when you see those oaks go from, 2 feet to 5 or 6 feet in 1 year, it's really exciting. So, and again, Jake, I know that in the village green now, there's the lawn doesn't go all the way up to the trees anymore, that there's open space between the tree trunk and where the lawn is. So I think that's pretty cool.
I know we've had some areas too with erosion because of the flash floods actually carving out and taking the soil all away and leaving the roots exposed. So that's also an issue.
Management.
Yeah.
So a couple things. One, thank you everybody who made comments. It's great to hear the passion for the trees and to know there's more people in the community who focus on things that many of us are very passionate about as well. So thank you. I think a couple things. I mean, between the comment that we're not keeping up with the replacement just because of be it staff or resources, and then Chair Renner, your comments about climate change accelerating. I mean, it could be that we look at having a big push once those saplings are ready. What an exciting project. Thank you guys for collecting the acorns and doing, they are not easy to propagate. I've tried, so smart to work with a nursery. That's great. But maybe we look at some kind of push. Additionally, you talked about a lot of tips. Marietta, you've talked about tips. Maybe there's something that can go out in village newsletters. Hey, it's this time of year, make sure you're doing X, Y, Z, or don't do this, offering the public some information and resources. And then, George, thank you for the highlighting the legacy or heritage trees. I mean, I could see something where we profile heritage trees. I remember being downtown in the offices of Open Lands, and there in their entryway was a beautiful photograph of the big white oak in Lake Forest. And I'm like, oh, it's famous across the region. It's like, hey, we can make our trees famous in our community because they do so much for us and for the environment. So I think you guys have offered a whole bunch of exciting information and ideas.
Let me just add on to that, and thank you all for coming. And I want you to know that, everybody on this committee, I think you can feel we're all very passionate about this. As Chairman Renner talked about, this holistic view of what we're doing. So the leaf blower thing, which we'll talk about a little bit tonight again, is yes, it was about noise, it was about pollution, but it was also trying to change people's thoughts about, you don't really need to take the leaf litter up off the ground because it's a part of the whole ecosystem with the microbes and the bugs and everything. And the view of a clean lawn, doesn't necessarily have to be that way. So we can do so much in the village and with ordinances and things, but the community aspect is so important, what you all are doing and everyone that shows up and talks about this. And I don't know what the percentage of public to private land is in the village, but I would expect that there's much more private homeowner land than public. So, we have to model the way for citizens to also take these same approaches to their own stewardship of their own parcels of land, no matter how small they are, and try and do things with, being a little bit more responsible to the rest of the plants and animals and insects that are sharing, these lands with us. So it's just my thoughts. And as we get into the night sky and shielding lights and the bird city, it all kind of ties together, what at least what we're trying to kind of move forward here. And so much of that is then education of people to get them to buy in and move along in the same direction, and see what we're doing, how it benefits the community.
You know, I just wanted to add one more thing. The thing that you did about taking acorns and taking them to a nursery, you took the babies to the nursery, and they're growing there. That's a captivating story. And I think you can do a lot with that. I think people would really be engaged and connect with what's happening there by, you could start to do this on a bigger scale and raise money. It could become a fundraiser. You could take photographs, and this baby was planted here, and look at him now,
Want to sponsor one?
Yeah, yeah, it's just a really dynamic story that I think you can then spread the word and get other people excited about, this is the acorn from Grandma's yard, and we're gonna plant it and then put that tree in our yard. So, way to go. That's just awesome.
Thank you so much. Okay, there's no vote or recommendation on this, right? It's just a discussion. A lot of information here. This is gonna help us move forward. Thank you. Okay, the next up is, and we'll circle back to the other item after this.
Should we think, we can let Colette go.
Oh, yes, sorry. Thank you very much for your presentation. We appreciate your time so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
What a fruitful, wonderful presentation. I am so honored that you are a partner of CRTI. You guys are clearly moving in the right direction. It's so wonderful to see leaders so passionate. And I just sent Clara your municipal summary that actually will tell you the information that at least we have on the stats in terms of your land cover area by use, the plantable space that you have itemized by the type of land, so whether that's private or public. And I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions or have a discussion with you moving forward. So again, thank you so much for your time and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So next up is our discussion on the leaf blower. Speaking of that,
Yeah.
you want to summarize where we're at?
Yeah, so a request came into the village. Let me get to that letter really quickly. From Liz and Dick Uline, requesting an extension to the leaf blower ban, an exemption for 2 years. And they basically submitted a letter on June 2nd requesting that at the last village board meeting, President Charlot suggested the SEC take a look at that and kind of make a recommendation or something that the village board can consider when deciding whether or not to grant this request. So what we were able to do is work with our consultants to put together a map showing the 20+ acre properties that would be considered as part of this. And just something else to consider, the other neighboring communities that have enacted these gas-powered leaf blower bans haven't necessarily created this exemption. And this is the 20-acre map. The only, there are 2 items on here, which are the Park District and the Shore Acres parcels. It's just important to note that within the existing leaf blower ban, that there are kind of exemptions already created for them. The Park District has that 2-year exemption already.
Right, that's it, that's already in there.
Yeah.
So none of the other communities, according to the letter here, have exempted these, right?
Have exempted, yeah, private.
Right, and some of these communities, we were in our leaf blower committee. So, okay. I just want-
Or what the ban was based off of due to existing
Okay.
regulations.
Okay. None have exemptions. Okay. Okay, let's open it up for discussion.
Are these private citizens? I'm sorry, I don't know
Yes.
what, okay.
And so they're asking for for their own property?
I think what this is a general, we've already, the village board in conjunction with the SEC has already granted a temporary exemption for 2 years for the park district. What we're really talking about here is any private properties that are left of over 20 acres, and whether we want to also extend, it's not a permanent exemption, it's a 2-year exemption to get into the leaf blower, to join the leaf blower regulations.
Yeah, and it would possibly apply to some public areas as well that are shown on that map. It's just basically anything that's not covered in the exemptions already listed in that leaf blower ordinance, which was included in your packet.
Can you share the map, and let's go over the parcels really quickly with everybody so you can understand.
Thank you, Drew.
Pull that up.
The left-hand corner is gonna be the sanctuary, and that's the HOA properties. Most of it is, it's shared properties that the HOA collectively takes care of. It's predominantly wet, there's some other open areas. It's not maintained to a great level, and there's some on the south side of that square, upper left-hand side, is Park District properties. So, they're already kind of covered by that, but just, it's one of those areas that I would probably equate to like out-of-play golf areas. The level of maintenance, they're probably not using leaf blowers there today. So that's up here in this area. This is the golf course. This is the area that is Java's property, qualified.
Yeah.
This is the Stonebridge development, which is only really the front half of it's maintained in a great degree. The back over here, this is Forest Preserve, this is Oriole Grove. Railroad property, all that's included. I've never seen them use a leaf blower. Hey, George. Usually much louder pieces of equipment.
Yeah.
Here, so this is all shore acres here, that's within the village. This little hammer shape is outside the village. We're not fully incorporating that golf course area. This is the actual part of the Questing distinct property is the Questing party. To the south here is ownership of the farm area of various property owners, but it's all within the farm. And that's really it. So not a big universe of properties that fall under that area, and probably, golf courses are already covered.
Right.
And so then you're really dealing with the Forest Preserve. They don't maintain that to that level of degree. It's not a risk.
No.
So not a big universe.
Right, and even the HOA would be a collective 20 acres, not an individual person with 20 acres. An individual landowner.
I mean,
It's joint.
feels like it opens a can of worms are they requesting on behest of the HOA? Or
No.
just their own individual?
No, this is a private person, but I think the question of, my personal view is, we shouldn't even be opening it up to all over 20 acres. I think the question for me is, do we want to make an exemption for a private individual owner of over 20 acres, which really we're talking 1 or 2. The rest are HOAs, they're forest preserves, they're train tracks. I don't want to open it up I personally don't want to open it up to all those larger than. I think we should narrow the question down.
I'm not clear on the request, the letter, if this request is economic, if it's one of, I debate the legitimacy of the noise comparison. It's not true. The citation that gas, electric, battery powered are as noisy as gas, that's factually not true. And noise decibels is one thing. It's the frequency also that you have to look at. That's as more disturbing than just the decibels. So I'm just looking for clarification on the request that it's one of maintenance and possibility of the technology, or is it financial? Is it other? Just trying to
from
understand
what I
that.
read from the letter, they're just saying the electric don't work as well, and we don't believe that electric are quieter than the gas. And so they're making a request that they can be exempt. I'm assuming this property has neighbors. right?
Yes.
There are,
It's
and
the light pink piece
Right.
parcel right there. So yes.
So this is going up Green Bay Road,
Sheridan Road to
Sheridan
the
Road.
east.
Sheridan Road, turn east.
just north of Crabtree?
Correct.
Correct.
And it runs from Sheridan to the lake.
Yep.
You know, when I read the letter, there are assumptions. We have already learned from experience that battery-powered leaf blowers simply don't get the job done, but there are quite a few battery-powered leaf blowers on the market now that are used by professional landscapers. One I have here is called STIHL,
Still.
BGA. It's electric handheld leaf blower. It has the most powerful battery-powered handheld leaf blower. It's a preferred brand of professional power equipment, and it can run for 500 minutes, which is over 8 hours on one single charge. So there are tools out there that can be used. The other thing that's striking to me is that this is a private family asking the community to make an exemption for them. And it doesn't fit with what we've all decided, you know, that this is what we want to do, and using a leaf blower is a personal decision.
The Park District has purchased 2 backpack electric leaf blowers, and they are silent. I heard them using them on the pickleball course the other day, and I had to walk up to the man and take his picture of what he was using because I was so shocked at how quiet it was. You could hardly tell that they were doing work over there. Personally, I don't like the idea of making exemptions for individual citizens just because they want them, if they can't even be bothered to show up to this committee and speak on their behalf of why we should make such an exemption. I'm a little hesitant to grant it as well.
I think we passed an ordinance and we should stick by it.
I mean, we're looking to give a recommendation to the board. And, I mean, I think our recommendation is, you know, that we stand by the ordinance as it is, and I'm not convinced of the letter's content that there's a substantive case that it's impossible to do. So that would be my position as well.
Okay, do we need a roll call?
I mean, just a general, somebody making a
Or
motion.
just general consensus, you know what, because this is going to the.
It sounds like, but if it'd be nice to have a clean motion, if somebody want to make a motion to say, recommend the board not approve an amendment.
Can we get a motion to, I assume, not approve?
So moved.
So move, second?
Second.
All right. Roll call, please.
You can do a voice vote.
All voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Recommendation?
Is anybody opposed?
Any opposed? Okay. I thought I heard everybody.
You know, I do have a question. When will we know, when will this be taken to the board? And Monday? And then will they make a decision at that time?
They would direct staff to in some direction. They would say, like, come back with an order to amend it, or we recommend not changing it, that is the conversation.
Okay.
All right. We're going to get into some of the administrative portions of the meeting, just to let you know. Thank you. We need to circle back. I skipped an item by mistake. We have considerations of the April 18th, 2023 regular minutes. Does anyone have any questions, amendments?
I had a couple edits, just where some names were wrong, and then additionally in the village staff report, school was missing in one place, but also the 2 projects, the replacement footbridge and the middle school parking lot. I'm pretty sure Drew mentioned the time frame, like this summer, blah, blah, blah. And it just, there's no time frame.
I think the school was supposed to be done before the parade, wasn't it? No?
It was gonna be before school this fall, though.
Yes, they have to,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So
So there
they're like
was-
starting tomorrow. I talked to Jay Kahn today at the school district because there was conversations about parade and some other issues related to the parade. And so the idea, I reached out to Jay and said, when does this start? And it's really, I think, literally starting tomorrow.
Awesome.
So,
Awesome. Yes, so anyway, just a couple, mostly just administrative comments.
I got the blah, blah, blah part. The second, you said, you asked about the footbridge. The
It's
status.
just, they didn't have the time frame for implementation. So it was the footbridge and the middle school.
So the footbridge project, the bridge design and all that has been green lighted. The bridge has been purchased. And we're back and forth with paperwork. It will be in production until fall. And so we're looking at a late fall installation.
Yeah. So I think you said that last
Okay.
time. It just said there's these two projects and didn't have a time frame. And I was sure we talked about it.
Okay.
Will there be a ribbon cutting ceremony for the new bridge?
Probably.
Yeah, that
Nice.
sounds pretty nice.
Yeah.
Great. Can I get a motion to approve as amended?
Approve?
Second.
Okay. Roll call or voice vote?
For what are we talking about?
The
Minute.
meeting minutes.
Just as somebody, as amended, this roll call is fine. I'm sorry, not voice vote.
Voice
Voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
I see one question in the Q&A.
Oh, okay.
Oh, my.
Sorry if we have someone online.
The question was at 8:34 and just said, yeah, thank you. So I think it was in
welcome.
response to the presentation or
Okay.
the letting us know that we're
Okay.
moving.
Oh, yay. I see. Yay.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Thanks, Nancy.
Well, that also may have been the leaf blower.
It might have, yeah, I think that's probably likely if it was 3 or 4 minutes ago.
Okay. Village staff report?
We talked about it briefly. I just wanted to let you guys know that one of our interns is working on the Bird City, Illinois application, and so we are moving forward with that.
Do we have a time frame?
I think we have this intern through the end of the summer, so I think the goal is to apply for it within the next few months, definitely.
I know it was mentioned, just observationally, has anything been noted about the bird population in our area? Has there been any effects? I know we had the avian flu pass through. There was a period of time, like, take your bird feeder down and,
Yeah, I can't speak specifically to right here, except that there's a lot of birds that are in free fall. Populations are really struggling. So I can't say specifically here, but it's pretty bad.
Saw a
in general.
bluebird and a goldfinch yesterday, so they're healthy.
Excellent.
It's a nice sighting right there. Yeah.
anything else?
Nothing else at this
Okay.
time.
Members report, anything anyone want to share that they bring up?
I thought the committee might like to know that Lake Forest Garden Club just awarded Lake Bluff Open Lands an $80,000 grant to do a bunch of work in the Carolyn Getz wetland, if you know where that parcel is, in the Bath and Tennis Club area. So it'll be some restoration work as well as building out infrastructure for aging trails and the little platform that looks over the wetland. And it will cover some new signage and an intern program. So
Where is that, Sophia?
so it's in the Bath and Tennis Club development, if you know where that is. If you go in and go to the end and take a left, it's a little, I think it's a 6-acre parcel and was protected in the 80s. It was sort of it was the genesis of Lake Bluff Open Lands and the first parcel that they started managing. And it's a white pine forest and a wetland. And there have been some unusual plants there, which they're hoping with a big restoration, they might come back.
You read the Metro at all?
And it's a little wetland, it's important for migratory birds.
You come into Lake Bluff from Chicago. There's like
It's, you know, if you take the train,
Yeah,
that's
if
what
you-
we were just saying.
is that, yeah, that's a
Yeah.
really good way. If you
See
take the
it.
train from Lake Bluff, it's right on your right. So some nice investment in our community.
Okay, anyone else, member reports?
I mean,
I just wonder, the ravines are such a big challenge, and we won't get into it right now because I know it's not on the agenda, but at some point I would like to have a serious discussion about what this committee can do to help protect the massive erosion that's going on in those ravines right now.
I know that when I was on the board, there was a number of reports and discussions, and maybe the village staff can just give us an update on where they're at with the studies and where, I mean, it was a difficult subject, it was an expensive subject, and I know George was involved in trying to work on erosion and control, so.
I mean, if this committee is charged with keeping the land of Lake Bluff environmentally sustained, I think the ravines are the biggest challenge that maybe not the village faces, but the community faces.
Yeah. We certainly could get an update, I assume, on where we've been. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Chair's report, don't have anything tonight. So can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Going for a record.
That would have been Stonebridge.
Oh, was it? Yeah.
We've had some marathons, though.
Claire, do you want this,
We have.
from?
Yeah,
the
I
women?
would love